her desk. Yeah, I think it's really cool.
Oh, okay. I like that.
You want one?
What, you have extra?
I make them.
Oh, you make masks?
Mhm.
Oh, yeah, I'll take it.
Homemade if you want.
I gotta sign it too. Oh my God.
I don't have that much of a.
I gotta
chair.
work really hard to get in your
No,
graces.
I'll get you one.
Ready? All right, I'd like to call this meeting to order, please. And since Mrs. Brown isn't here today, I will go through roll call. So I am here. Mr. Hudson, not. Mr. Atkins, Ms. Brown, not. Mr. Fong,
Here,
Mr. Feltner,
here.
Ms. Holycross,
Here.
Mrs. Johnson is no longer here. Mr. Keller is not here. Mrs. Nicely,
Here.
Mrs. Phillips,
Here.
and Mr. Sievert.
Here.
Thank you. All right. I'd like to approve the minutes from our September 3rd meeting. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, moving on to presentations. Before we get into our presentations, I'd just like to say that it seems like we've been meeting a ton and we're making lots of progress. There's lots of things that are positive. And I think we're making very good strides with this commission. So there's a plethora of work to do, and I thank you all for being a part of it. And
for the benefit of those attending, it's a little difficult to hear you, and I know it's difficult because of the masking, and do not take your mask off. I would rather not hear you than to take the mask
Okay,
off.
all right.
Just to let you know.
is there a?
Thank you.
Yeah,
You're
thank you.
welcome.
I'm just kind of soft spoken anyway, so sorry. I'll try and enumerate.
Well, yeah,
Enunciate that
face
way.
this way, and I think it'll be fine.
All right. So I was just saying that I thought we were all doing a great job and that there's lots of really positive things happening. So thank you for all your time. And I know there's a ton of work. As we look through each of these subcommittees, there's multiple bullet points, and behind each of those bullet points is a ton of work. So thank you for being steadfast.
I
Yes.
would like to propose to consider, after we prioritize our agendas, to pick
Oh,
one
that
from
one.
each. I'd like to propose, after we prioritize our initiatives, to perhaps take one from each subgroup and work on them, as opposed to,
All,
yeah.
I would agree.
Okay. Sweet. That's all.
I would agree. All right, so we have presentations. So we have the Law Director of Troy, Grant Kerber is, yep, there he is. Hello, Grant.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Grabbing some chairs. I guess, thank you for having me. And I know I've been asked to come in. Previously, I spoke with Mr. Majors and Ms. Brown. I don't
This is
see her.
Grant, yes, she's absent.
Okay, so with this commission being reactivated, sometimes as a commission of the city of Troy, what I wanted to do was to go over some of our obligations as a public body, because the Human Relations Commission is a public body, on how you conduct your meetings and making sure that everything's done the right way. And the real purpose, there's two main laws that the state of Ohio has put together that the purpose is, the state has concluded that meetings in public are of great value to the public because we are a democracy. The public deserves to know how decisions are made, how deliberations are done. So they've enacted what's called the Open Meetings Act. Now, this applies to the city councils. It applies to the park board, the rec board, the civil service commission, and I mean, you're from the schools, it applies to the Board of Education as well. But sometimes it's easy because it can be, some of its requirements can seem a little bit foreign to how we normally engage in our decision making. So the first important thing to point out is that this applies to the Human Relations Commission as a whole, and it also applies to your subcommittees that you have formed. So basically, and a lot of times there's a lot of gray areas, but the Open Meetings Act defined a meeting as a prearranged meeting or a group of the majority of the members to discuss or deliberate on public business. So prearranged is pretty, normally you would think that that's pretty self-evident what a prearranged meeting would be, but as we discuss later, I'll get into a little bit of where that could trip you up a little bit. Majority of the members, oftentimes where this poses a challenge for city council is that many of their committees are just 3 members. So you're talking 2. Normally you try to bounce ideas off one another and things like that, but you really have to be careful because there is an obligation to the public to know, look, we want to, at a minimum, observe your deliberations and figure out how you come to your conclusions, your decisions, and things of that nature. So the public does have the right to observe that and to see that. And then to discuss public business. Public business, that's really defined in what your duties are in the Troy codified ordinances. I'm sure everybody has taken a look at that component as to, because essentially it's your mission statement, what you are bringing to the citizens of Troy. So if you get together to watch a game or something like that, that's not necessarily, you don't have to run away from one another saying, you can do things like that, but you just say, all right, we're not going to be talking about the Human Relations Commission and its business outside of the context of a meeting that's open to the public. So, there's a lot of nuances to this, and you'd be surprised how often questions come to me as the law director for the city of Troy as, can we do this or can we do that, and things like that. I'm a resource here to help you too, if you're concerned about anything or if you want to do some things. I'm just to give you an example of how some of the different things that I see that, for instance, oftentimes like a commission such as this may choose to say, well, we want to go out somewhere and take a tour of a certain place or something like that. But then you're like, well, how do we invite everybody and it not violate the Open Meetings Act? Well, and the law has sort of evolved on in this regard, but you can go on fact-finding missions, take a tour of a place, but it really can't be a Q&A. It can't really be, well, let's discuss while we're going through it. But I mean, that's sort of our natural thing is if you're going out to some location to tour something, to look at something, it's just natural that, oftentimes you want to talk about it. But you have to have great care in not doing that because generally, I mean, if you're doing a tour of something, the public's not invited. They don't get to watch what's going on things like that. So there may be occasions where you want to ask me some questions, and that's fine. But the most important thing of what I'm just trying to identify here this evening is that, this body is subject to the Open Meetings Act, and you need to have care to do your deliberations in public. Now, let me just give you some scenarios that oftentimes come up and can create issues. Sometimes people, you can get some delicate things in front of you that your natural reaction might be, well, this might not be appropriate for the community at large to watch or to see this. Where the big areas where different public bodies that get into trouble would be, and probably the most common thing that I see are like emails sent out to everybody. All right. Somebody might send out an email saying, all right, meetings at this time, or, hey, I have a draft policy I want the committee as a whole to take a look at. Your natural reaction is you open that up, you look at it. I don't like item 2 or 3. I think 4 should be changed like this. Send all, send all, send all, send all. What happens when you're doing that on those email chains? You're violating the Open Meetings Act. Okay? Because what you're doing, even though you're not all together, you are discussing the public business or the business of this commission outside the public view and not in an open meeting. There's many variations on that. With electronic media, it's really created a lot more, many new challenges to be careful of and cognizant of, so that that's not violated. It could be, I don't know, I'm not really up to speed on all the electronic communications and things like that, but there's so many different ways that you can share things with everybody and invite, or even if you don't invite, commenting on it, it sort of elicits comments on it, and you need to be very aware of that. And Patrick, I know you have a special technique, what you do on these mass emails. Why don't you share, and this may be helpful.
Okay, you sent me an email one related to
BCC.
correspondence.
Yes, yes.
When you said special techniques, correct. So if I want to communicate with the council members, and I simply want to give them information and not encourage group comments or chatter, what I will do is I will send the email maybe to the mayor, because she'll be copied on it, and she's not subject to sunshine law issues. And then I will blind copy the council members. And if you know blind copying, when you get an email that you've been blind copied on, you don't see your name in the tagline, if you will, or in the banner. So if Todd's on that email as part of the blind copying, at the end of that email, I will say, if you have any questions, email me back. All he can do is email me, because I'm the only one, if he wants to reply, even if he hits reply all, it may be me and the mayor that he's replying to. That keeps everybody, it minimizes, and I don't think anybody's ever gone to the extreme of recopying everybody else. It's too much effort for them. And what it's been good at is it prohibits them from inadvertently violating any kind of sunshine law issue.
Now, there's some things that probably Salome is going to take care of for you. When you have an open meeting, there's just a few other items here. One, you have to give notice to the public. So, and that's, she goes ahead and takes care of that as far as, so it's advertised to the public so people know when to come and watch the deliberations. And the other obligation that comes along with that is you have to maintain meaningful minutes. We can get into the details of the minutes and things like that. You just can't say we met on September 17th. We were in session for an hour and a half and we adjourned without putting, you have to put some sort of summary of what occurred during the meeting. Another, and this actually happened in Hamilton County, where they were deliberating whether or not to build the Bengal Stadium. They thought they'd get around the Open Meetings Act. So what the city manager down there did is there was some negotiating over who was going to pay for what, or I don't remember the details, but he was, the city manager was trying to feel out what the council members thought and what they would support. So, and I don't know how many people they have on their city council, but what he did is he arranged to meet with 2 council members at 9 o'clock. He talked about this issue, this financing issue. At 9:30, he met with two other council members. They discussed the same thing. 10 o'clock, he met with two more, and so on. The Ohio Supreme Court said, no, you can't do this sort of round robin type of meeting. You're all discussing the same thing. While the majority of you were not there, it was clearly an orchestrated effort to get around the sunshine law. So oftentimes, the courts certainly look at this. When in doubt, we are going to be in favor of all these deliberations being open in the public's eye. And that really just needs to be your motto. My goal here today is not to tell you what to do or say, I'm certainly available for any sort of questions, but the most important thing is just to let you know of your obligations to the public with the Open Meetings Act. And when in doubt, ask a question. Should I be doing this? We owe it to the public that they know how we're going about doing this and how we're deliberating on it. Okay. Next item I'm going to talk about is public records. As a public body, you're also subject to the public records laws. Now, records can mean a lot of things. It just used to mean papers and sometimes maps and things of that nature. Now, all that electronic stuff falls underneath this category too. So records can be in any form. They don't have to be paper. And most oftentimes they are electronic in this day and age. The first thing is and a document doesn't have to be created by this commission. It can be something received by the commission. Say I send you a letter, I send an email to the attention of the Human Relations Commission. That could be a public record as well. So Ohio, the first thing that they do with regard to public records is they place an obligation upon each public body to keep a schedule of and identifying what records that public office might maintain, and to determine, all right, how long are we going to keep these certain records? Some things, and all the different city departments have their public record retention schedules. And there are certain things that we have to do. We have a record retention commission within the city of Troy. And then sometimes you have to get authorization to destroy certain records. Some things you can destroy at a certain time. But what we did is administratively, we put together a draft record retention schedule for you that was based on some of the other committees. You have to, ultimately, you all will have to decide your record retention schedule. But we put something together for you for your consideration and deliberation on, okay? So when it comes to public records, these things are defined, anything that documents the operation and conduct of business of the commission here. So public records could be, and they don't necessarily just have to be on City of Troy electronics or computers. They could be, sometimes they could be on your own cell phones, texting back and forth and things of that nature. Now, the courts have somewhat left unanswered about text and phone messages can be public records. They have left somewhat unanswered whether or not text, say one of you text one another about some issue on the Human Relations Commission, whether or not that is subject to Public Records Act. Because where this comes up is, as a member of the public, they have a right, and they don't even have to be citizens of Troy. I mean, it could be somebody from California, it could be somebody from Ecuador, for that matter, comes in and says, I want all communications to and from Mr. Majors and Ms. Holycross related to the Human Relations Commission. Well, and trust me, this does come up quite often, requests of that nature. So one thing is we have a schedule. It tells you how long you can keep different things like that, and you'll ultimately determine the schedule. But that's why it's important to, one, know what a public record is, and two, how long you have to keep it. Now, one of the areas that, and this sort of ties into the social media policy, there's been a lot of recent development in the law as far as like websites, Facebook pages, and things like that. And so the city also maintains social media policies as to who can use the website, because it's my understanding there's some interest from this commission to have some sort of electronic presence to make available to the public. Well, you should consider a social media policy for a number of different reasons. The first thing that it would look at is, all right, who can post something on behalf of this commission? You know, what if you have somebody that you consider a rogue member saying, I want to post this, but everybody else doesn't? There needs to be some sort of decision as to who has the authority to post it on behalf of the commission. The other thing where it comes into play is on most social media platforms, other outside people that aren't associated with it, you know, they can comment on it. Well, first off, anything you post on an electronic platform is subject to the public records law. So you have to maintain a historical log of what was on that social media platform. But it also comes into, you know, sometimes people are mean out there these days. I mean, they post nasty things on, you know, it could be, say they post a comment in response to something the Human Relations Commission put up there. Natural reaction is delete. Well, you might be violating the, you know, your records retention schedule, and what you would have to keep a log of that for a certain period of time. So oftentimes, you know, it's sometimes it's more of a hassle than what it's worth to have a sort of dialogue-driven social media presence, because, you know, you risk having non-productive conversations left up on there that you have to keep up there because of the records retention, or the Public Records Act. The other thing is and some of our current political leaders have learned, and they're getting in hot water from blocking people on Twitter. And once you become a certain public figure and things like that, you're denying them access to their First Amendment rights. All right. So that's another thing that would come into the social media policy. And I know that we put a draft together for your consideration and changes, deliberations, or whatever you would like to do on it, but it's based on what other departments in the city have done. That's it. I noticed there were a few other items on the agenda that I wasn't really prepared to discuss. It was talking, I think it was the commission duties. That's really set forth in the codified ordinances. I'm happy to talk about it if there's any questions on that, but I think that's pretty self-evident. That's probably the first thing that you looked at when you even submitted an interest in this commission. And what was the last item?
Operating guidelines.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I understand that there was some, there was some, it's my, you've already passed sort of like guidelines for this body, is that
Yes.
correct? Okay. And those certainly think, as a body, you have the ability within the law, and you really take a look at any sort of changes. You do have the ability to determine the rules that you operate under, and there was some suggestions brought to city staff about some suggested changes. I looked at them, so I'll let the body go ahead and consider those at an appropriate time.
Thank you.
Okay.
That was
So
very
if there's
helpful.
not any questions.
So sending an email with the subject, don't respond, that's not,
Well,
cutting it, right?
You can do that. It's
Still-
fine, but people don't always follow the
Right,
rules.
okay. Okay. Now, if we send it to Salome, is she considered, like Patrick had mentioned, sending something to the mayor? Is she considered not?
No,
or-
she's not a member of this commission.
Okay.
Okay, and as an individual member can send it to her, and it's not any sort of concern about violating the Open Meetings Act, because again, it's
Okay,
not a prearranged meeting, not a majority of the members. So if just one member sends something to her, that's fine. Now, it may be subject to the Records Act where the city or, we have to keep that,
mhm,
just to document the functions of this body, but, that's not an issue.
okay. I appreciate all this information
Oh, okay.
very much, very much.
And I'm available because inevitably these topics will come up again. I would be surprised if they do not, that you don't hit a point where you do have to look at this again. But, you always feel free to have somebody reach out to me or, I'm more than happy to assist in any way that you may see fit.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks. Okay, so next we have Ian Ridgway from the Miami County Board of Elections. Hi, Ian.
Set up here. I brought paperwork, so I'm just gonna get all that
Okay.
sorted here. All right. Thank you guys for having me. I'm Ian Ridgway. I am the Deputy Director at the Miami County Board of Elections. Was asked to come here and talk about a couple different topics. I am going to apologize up front. The way I tend to do stuff is I'll start as basic as possible. So you might hear stuff that you know, but there's a chance that maybe I'll say something like, well, I didn't know that before. So that's generally why I do that. So first thing I'm going to talk about is voter registration. Very basic, starting with who's eligible to be a registered voter. Anybody who's a U.S. citizen, whether natural born, naturalized, whatever, if you're a U.S. citizen. If you're over the age of 18 by the date of the general election. So that gets a little confusing sometimes. We do have in primaries, 17-year-olds can vote in primaries as long as they register and they are going to be 18 before the general election. The 17-year-old voters can only vote on candidates that are being nominated for the general election ballot, so they can't vote on levies or local liquor options or anything like that, but they can vote on those candidates. You do have to be a resident of the state of Ohio, generally also the county, for 30 days prior to the election. So how we kind of work with that is the deadline to register to vote is 29 days before every election. So anybody who's registered before then obviously would be a resident 30 days before. You are eligible as long as you are not currently incarcerated on a felony conviction. So felons can vote after they've served their time. People who are incarcerated in the jail awaiting trial can vote. But if you are incarcerated on a felony conviction, we get a report once a month from the clerk of courts. We cancel those registrations. Once they are released, they can re-register and retain those voting rights.
So what if they're on probation?
Once they've served their time and they're not
That's fine.
incarcerated on that conviction,
Okay.
they can come back and
Do we go into the jail to allow people to vote?
we do get some folks who ask us to come and help them vote. We'll bring them ballots, all that. And this is kind of a personal opinion more than anything. We could do better as far as the outreach in there. We get a handful every election, not 40, 50, but a dozen or so.
Is there a way that, is it just automatically they can vote no matter what? Or is it if a judge takes like, how do I check if I'm a felon so I don't get into trouble if I want to vote?
Yeah, any registered voter, the easiest way to check it is if you can go on voteohio.gov. You can look up if you're anybody in the state, honestly, if they're registered to vote, you just type in their name, type in the county where they live. It'll tell you if a name pops up, they're registered. If it says no results, it's possible there's another name. Say my dad's name is James, but he goes by Jim. If I type in Jim, it's not going to give me anything. So sometimes you'll get that. But if there's no records at all, they're not registered in the state.
Okay. Is there, the last question, is there anything that we can do or what you need to be more proactive to do, to be in the jail and to?
That I'm not 100% sure. I know how we work with the jails is the same way we work with the nursing homes, is we reach out to the jails reach out to the inmates and say, who wants to do this? And that's kind of about as far as that goes.
Okay.
It's not like just that general, who wants to do this, rather than, hey, you're eligible to do this.
Do you feel like felons know that they have the right to vote?
That is something I'm not entirely sure about.
Okay.
We could definitely do a little bit better work getting the word out there.
Okay, thank you.
Because it's different across all 50 states. All 50 states have different rules. Some places, if you're a felon, that's it. You can't vote anymore.
Yeah, that's what I always thought.
Yeah, Ohio's pretty good, is that once you serve your time, you get out, you can re-register.
I guess I want
Nice.
to clarify serve your time, because like when Marvin asked if you're on probation or parole, technically you haven't served all your time.
Okay,
So
that would
you're
be
not
correct.
incarcerated anymore, but you
Yes.
still have time that you have to serve. So are you saying that as long as they are a convicted felon and not incarcerated?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, the only time that the felonies come into play is if someone is convicted and they're actively being incarcerated for that felony.
And is there
So
an
sorry,
instance?
so I guess then if you're on parole and you get placed in jail or prison, then when you come back on parole, let's say, and they keep giving you chances, you have to re-register every time you come back out?
Yes. The only other eligibility, the only other people that are not eligible, people who have been declared incompetent by a court of common pleas, and people who have been permanently disenfranchised for a violation of election laws. So those two are court specific, where they say, sorry, you can't vote. Those are pretty rare, to be honest. I don't think we have anybody in the county who fits that. I may be wrong, don't quote me entirely, but if we do, it's going to be like one or two.
Mhm.
I've not personally heard of anybody in the county that's on that list. Residency is always a big question we get. As far as how do we determine residency, we base it on your permanent residence. The colloquial is it's where you lay your head at night. You get into temporary residences. So, for example, if you're a student who's living on a college campus, it's really up to you to determine whether that college campus is your permanent residence or a temporary residence. So you kind of get the freedom to, so for example, I went to school in Portsmouth, and I had the kind of option to say, do I permanently reside in Portsmouth, or do I permanently reside in, at the time, Tip City? So there's that. Nursing homes is the same kind of thing. They get that choice is, do I reside at the nursing home permanently, or do I reside in my former residence as a permanent? And then voters that are overseas, obviously there's kind of a plan to return. That's what we kind of base that temporary off, is if they're planning to return here, then this is their permanent residence. So voters that are overseas can vote in local elections. Those are generally, most of the ones we get as far as ballot applications are going to be military and military families. But especially this year, since we're a little busier, we are getting a lot of folks that are traveling, or we've had a couple that they went to, say Greece or France or something in March and then got stuck. So those folks, the Uwakava Act, Don't ask me exactly what UCOP stands for. It's uniformed something it oversees. Basically, it pertains to all the laws federally for overseas voters. Those voters are going to get all their ballots actually tomorrow. They're going out. So they get a little bit of a head start to kind of account for that extra mail time. Let's see, homeless voters is the other one that pops up when we talk about residency. I want to say this is probably 7 or 8 years old now, a court decision with the Northeastern Ohio Homeless Coalition. Voters that are homeless can register where they are, how do they word it? Their place of habitation. So for example, if somebody's came in and said, okay, I'm homeless, I'm living under the bridge on Market Street that goes across the river, they can register it with that as their location, as their home residence.
Wow.
We want to make sure everybody gets a chance to vote. That's the biggest thing.
Do we get a lot of those? Are you even allowed to say?
I honestly don't think we have any.
Okay.
I don't think we have any homeless voters in the county.
Okay.
Another thing for residencies, PO boxes. We get these occasionally where people try to register with a PO box. We do have to have a physical address for somebody if they're going to register. You can add a mailing address. So there's a couple areas throughout the county where most of their mail is handled in PO boxes. So we'll have a registration address and then a PO box for their mailing address. And the last thing for residency is there's a program called Safe at Home. Safe at Home is for victims of domestic violence, stalking, human trafficking, sexual battery, rape, that kind of family of issues that people deal with. Generally speaking, voting records, voting information, your residence, that's all public record. You could go up on voteohio.gov, look up me, and you'll have my address where I'm registered at, how I voted, as far as whether I voted a Democratic or Republican ballot in the past, what elections I voted in, all that. With Safe at Home, for those people, we keep a separate database. It's only accessible to the director and the deputy director. So we've got a bipartisan team there. And it's kept completely confidential. No one sees any of the information there except the director and myself. That's one I think is kind of underutilized in the county. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say how many we have, but we could definitely have more. When the program first started, we approached 1 or 2 of the kind of agencies that work with those folks, and those individuals, there's kind of a lot going on. They're not really thinking about voting at the top of their list, so we kind of got turned away a little bit at the time. So that is another place we can kind of be working on.
What do you need to have? Do you need like a police report in a
Yep,
application?
it's similar to most everything else that we do with elections. For example, disabilities. If somebody comes up and wants to use our accessible voting equipment, all they have to do is say, I'd like to utilize this.
Okay.
So if someone came and said, I qualify for Safe at Home, I'd like to register that way, we'll get them set up. That's all we do.
Yeah, that's good information.
But do they have to know about that? So if you fill out a registration and it's say on there?
Yeah, they do have to know about it. There is a special registration form for that. There's a special, all Safe at Home applicants, they vote absentee. It's all done through the mail. There's special absentee request forms. There's special absentee envelopes. The whole thing's set up in a way that it's obvious when we get the mail that the only people who can touch it and open it is the director or the deputy director.
Do you have marketing materials for those two? I would put them in my organization because that's just good information to have for the public.
I'll give you a card before I leave.
Okay,
Shoot me an
perfect.
email and I
Okay.
can get you all the information you have. So that's general voter registration. I'll pass these around. You guys have hopefully you guys are all registered to vote, so you guys have probably seen it before. But I'll pass these around. You can keep them, pass them out to your friends, family. Anybody who needs to register to vote, they fill out one of these forms, or you can do it online at voteohio.gov. You can get these forms if you want to do paper at our office, at every single high school, college, library, public library, DMV, JFS, Department of Health, Adams boards, opportunities for Ohio with disabilities. Most state or government agencies will have these, and most of them by law have to return them to our office. So for example, if you go down to the Troy Library, fill out a voter registration and hand it to them, they are required by law to bring it to our office. So I mean, they bring us a handful about every week. If they're not required to return them, I mean, ask, obviously, those come back to our office. We input all the information that's in there into our system. It gets checked. It goes into the state registration database, which checks all your information against Social Security and or the BMV records. If there's an issue there, we kind of work to get that all sorted out so that every voter is kind of verified that they are who they're saying they are. Anytime we get a form that's incomplete or we determine that the voter is ineligible, we will reach out to them by letter, by phone, however we can get a hold of them, let them know what's wrong and send them a new form. Obviously, if they're ineligible, we'll just explain why. And this is more just a general thing. Voters should fill out a new registration form every time there's something that changes in their information. If your last name changes, your first name changes, you move, so you got a new address, or your signature changes. That's one that a lot of people don't know, especially with there's going to be a lot more absentee voting this year. We check all those signatures to make sure they match what we have in our system. So if you sit there and you're like, well, the last time I filled out a registration was 1999 and my signature's changed a little bit, fill out a new voter registration, and we'll have your new signature on file. The last one that I have on registration is cancellation. This has kind of been a hot topic in the last year and a half. There's three main ways that people get their registrations canceled. The first one is you can request to have your registration canceled for any reason. There's a state form you fill out, you sign it, and you give it to us. And we will cancel your registration, no questions asked. The second one is the one that's we've heard a lot about in the last year or two. It's part of the national change of address or the state supplemental process. We also kind of refer to it as list maintenance. Primarily, it's working for people or working to keep voters. I'm trying to figure out my work this way. Primarily, it removes people that aren't active voters. Primarily, so NCOA is generally triggered when you move and you update your address with the Postal Service, but you don't update your voter registration. We get that information from the Postal Service. Once a year, we send out letters to all of those people and say, hey, it looks like you moved. Did you? And all they have to do is fill that form out, sign it, and send it back, and they're all good. They get updated. If they don't, that's kind of where the supplemental process comes in. Once we send that card out, it's a 4-year clock that starts. I believe it's 4. And at the end of that 4 years, we send them another card. If they don't respond to that, we cancel their registration. The supplemental process, when people are inactive for 2 years, and by inactive, I mean they haven't filled out a registration form, they haven't voted, they haven't signed a petition, anything that would count as voter activity. If you're not active for 2 years, we send you that notice. It starts a 4-year clock. All in all, you have 6 years to do something before we cancel those voters. Typically, I'd say in the high 90s as a percentage. Most of those people have moved out of the county and haven't updated their address, have died and we haven't gotten that report. We haven't confirmed that in our records. or have moved completely out of state and not canceled their registration. So most of those are people that wouldn't be on our lists had they kept it up to date anyway. I talked about canceling registrations for incarcerations. The last big group is deceased voters. This is more of an automatic process. We get a report once a month from the health department that says, here's all the county residents who passed away this year that may or may not be registered to vote. And we cross-reference that with our records. State law says that we have to confirm that, so we will send the deceased voter a letter that says, hey, essentially what it says is, hey, we saw that you were on the county death lists. Are you dead? It's kind of a weird letter to send out.
Anybody ever said no?
Not since I've been there, but I've been there terribly long. Essentially what it is if Joe Smith dies, we want to make sure that we got the right Joe Smith. We didn't get the wrong Joe Smith. But we are required by law to send that out. So we get a lot of calls. Why are you sending my husband a letter? He passed away, 2 months ago. It's kind of a weird thing. Are there any questions on voter registration so far? Okay. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is absentee balloting. This is the hot topic of the year. I'll pass these out. These are absentee applications. If you're all registered voters, you should have seen these come in your mail in the last couple of weeks. The state does generally even year elections. They send these out to every registered voter for general elections. They've done that, I believe, since 2012. But that is the state form. It has changed a little bit this year. It just looks different. There's no particular form that's required. Technically speaking, you can write it down on a napkin, toilet paper, piece of paper, whatever you want. As long as it has the required information and it's signed and dated, it's an absentee application. And that's something that not a lot of people know, but this is the form the state makes to make it a little bit easier for people. So there's two types of absentee ballots. The first one is by mail. That's the one we've been hearing a lot about recently. In Ohio, every absentee ballot, every ballot that goes in the mail, we require an application requesting one. If it's not, we don't just send them out to whoever. The application that you guys have, that's all the required information: name, date of birth, address, some kind of identification information, whether it's your driver's license number, last 4 of your social, or a copy of any valid form of identification for voting in Ohio. Statement that, hey, I'd like a ballot for this election, sign and date, and that's an application. They can be requested as early as January 1st every year, or 90 days before the election, whichever is earlier. So for example, the March election we had, 90 days before that election was mid-December. We started taking those applications right then, and we had them. We had people asking for them then. Every piece of information that's on there is checked by our staff to make sure it matches what we have in our system. The address, the date of birth, and the signature, and the identification and the signature is checked to make sure it matches. If it doesn't, we send the voter a letter and a new application, tell them to fill that out. If they leave us a phone number, we'll call them and talk to them, because sometimes the letter doesn't explain it as well as you could talk to somebody. We mail ballots out the first day after the close of registration. So this election, that's going to be October 6th. Anybody who has a absentee request in by October 5th, their ballot will be in the mail on October 6th. There's also going to be 2 million other ballots going in the mail that week. So if you don't have it by the 10th, don't worry, it's on the way. And those ballots can be returned by mail or by Dropbox or straight to our office. If you're returning it by mail, the requirement there is it has to be postmarked by the last date of postmark. It is the day before the election. If you wait kind of towards the end there, We always recommend physically going to the post office and have them stamp it in front of you. Because sometimes stuff doesn't get postmarked. If it doesn't have a postmark and we receive it after election day, we can't count it. It's just how the law works on that. If it's going to our office or in our Dropbox, it has to be there by 7:30 on election night. If it's there at 7:31, same kind of a deal, it doesn't get counted, it's late. The identification envelope that's in there has most of the same information as what's there. That's checked by a bipartisan team of election staff. We make sure all the information's correct before we can count the ballots. Anybody who the information doesn't match, we send them a form to give them a chance to correct that. That has to be received back to our office by the 10th day after the election. Other things that we always get on absentees, what are some reasons that ballots get rejected? The number one that we have, at least since I've been there, is a late return. If it's postmarked too late, if it's put in our Dropbox too late, if we get it on the 11th day after the election, the 12th day, that's the biggest one. The second biggest one is it's missing a ballot stub. Our county, we applied for a waiver, so we only have one stub on our ballots. If you tear that stub off and then put your ballot in there and keep the stub, we can't count your ballot. Stub has to be attached. Missing any identification information, and the form that we sent out wasn't returned. This doesn't happen as frequently, but I have seen it happen. Multiple ballots in the envelope or no ballots in the envelope. If you return more than one, we don't know whose is whose, so we can't count it. If there's no ballot, obviously we can't count no ballot. Any questions on absentee by mail?
Postage, how much?
Postage for this election, postage is 55 cents for return. So one stamp should do it. Other elections, it just kind of depends. Always call and ask. The good thing about it, in the state of Ohio, if you drop it in the mail and it doesn't have enough postage, the U.S. Postal Service will deliver it to us, and it'll still get there. We've had some dropped with no postage that still found their way to our office. All right. The other type of absentee voting is in person. It's very, very similar to election day voting. You come in, you sign in, you show your ID, we hand you a ballot, you go fill it out, and you put it in the scanner, and it's exactly like voting on election day. Biggest difference there is timelines. We start that on October 6th. It goes almost every day until November 2nd. So there's 28 days of early voting. Some changes this year. If you didn't happen to vote in last November's election, we have new voting equipment this year. We put it out last November, but it's still kind of new to some people. We had those touch screens before that were about 80 years old. We're just doing straight paper ballots now. So you'll get your ballot, fill it out, just like a Scantron from school. And then we have scanners in all the polling locations where you'll put your ballot in there. It'll scan it and tabulate it right there. We won't have any results obviously till 7:30, but the obvious, we're going to have social distancing, face masks, cleaning of polling locations, hand sanitizers, everything that everybody's doing now. That's kind of the obvious biggest change. If you've early voted in the last year, we do have electronic signature pads that we're rolling out for this election. So there's no paperwork for voting early now other than the ballot. What's cool about the signature pads is it will automatically add that signature to your voter record. So we'll have a new signature to compare to if you ever vote by mail or sign a petition in the future. The last change is that we're moving back to the Miami County Courthouse for early voting. It's going to be at the south entrance behind the new fountain. Expect lines, especially with the distancing. We're going to have a lot of people and 6 feet in between them, so expect pretty long lines. Any questions on for in-person early voting. All right. The last topic I had was poll workers. These are our frontline election workers. I would argue that they do more work than in one day than we do in the office for the rest of the year, because it is a long day. It is a hard day. It's very unforgiving sometimes. So they kind of have to know a good portion of the election law to get there. We're always needing poll workers, even in normal years. When we don't have a global pandemic going on, we always need poll workers. So I'm gonna make a pitch for you. If you know anybody who wants to be a poll worker, have them give us a call. They can go to voteohio.gov and sign up. For each precinct that we have, we need 4 poll workers. Everything's done in bipartisan teams, so 2 Republican poll workers and 2 registered Democrat poll workers per precinct. We also have about 10, we call them rovers. They're people that are over several polling locations. They do the troubleshooting. If there's an issue, they bring supplies. They do kind of all the odds and ends for those locations. Altogether, we use about 350 poll workers for every countywide election. Typically, as I mentioned, there's Republicans and Democrats. We're typically hard pressed to find registered Democrats. So if you know somebody who's a registered Democrat or politically unaffiliated, we're allowed to use people that are unaffiliated to plug holes. Have them come by and talk about being a poll worker. It is paid. We pay way too little. It's $125 a day, but it is a phenomenal service to the community. We also pay $15 for training. We do provide training on all the election laws, how to use the equipment, and such. This year, every single poll worker must attend training. In the even years, we kind of play that by ear. We offer it to everybody. But if somebody, say they've worked for the past 10 years, they're like, I just can't make it. They've been through the training several times, so we'll kind of work with them. Yeah, so that's pretty much it with poll workers. Like I said, we need more. We're adding a bunch of COVID-related work, so we need more poll workers than normal. And then we've had a lot of long-time poll workers who kind of backed out, kind of playing it safe and staying home. So we are always needing poll workers.
And what's the age of the
I didn't put that on my notes. Yeah, anybody who's a registered voter. We also have a program called Youth at the Booth. That is for anybody who is 17 years old, at least, who is a high school senior, and would like to work at the polls. We are allowed to have up to 1 per precinct. So we're allowed 85 Youth at the Booth participants in the county every election.
Okay.
We typically get about 30 or 40. We've done a lot of work with the schools. There's some schools that are really great working with us. There's some that, Troy's been pretty good. So that's good for you guys to hear. Troy's been pretty good. Everybody's been pretty good this year. We've gotten a lot of schools that typically haven't been involved that are bringing us students.
How do you determine polling places? It seems like they keep shrinking the number of polling places, and I just looked it up. I mean, it looks like there's 6. I mean, we're just for the city of Troy.
Yes.
But it looks like there's 6. One's Redmond's, which would be out on Stanfield, so kind of hard to get to. The Nazarene Church, which is off of Barnhart or back in that area, so that's going to be kind of hard. You've got one on Dorset, which I would assume the relative citizens can get to relatively easy. Hobart, is that on Ridge? It just says Hobart. Is that Hobart?
That's the Hobart headquarters building down there.
And then at Troy Baptist Temple, and then Riverside. So, I mean, I guess that sort of has us around, but it also has 3 that are relatively hard to get to. And one of the things that has been brought up consistently by this group is how do we get people to, people are having problems getting to jobs, let alone getting to voting places. So is there a process? Do you offer a clause?
Ohio Revised Code is pretty lenient on how we decide that. So this is kind of how we do it. Most kind of do it in a similar fashion. Is we look at the precincts, whatever precincts we're looking at, however many we're looking at, and we try to find a location that is smack in the center of it. So Redmond's, for example, is exactly in the center of all precincts that it's holding, because it's got a couple of those Troy, city of Troy precincts, but it's also got a good portion of Concord Township. So it goes way north and way west. So that's and that's one I know because we just worked on
So
that.
they don't vote at the Y anymore?
No. And it's been kind of, especially in the last couple of years, we've had kind of a challenge. The state's really ramped up, which is a good problem to have. They've really ramped up their ADA compliance requirements for polling locations, which has really made the field of potential locations a lot smaller. Every time we've had, I think, 3 since I've been here. We have a polling location that backs out, says, hey, we're not interested. It throws us into panic mode for about a month while we're looking for somewhere. So far, we've lucked out. We found places. I hope that we continue to, when we run across that, we continue to luck out. But that's been our biggest issue. But yeah, typically we try to take a look at whatever precincts are there and put it as close to the center as possible. Obviously, and big enough to fit all of the people that are there.
Have they gone down? I mean, it just seems like, I don't know, I've been in Troy.
Probably about 5-6 years ago, I think we had close to 1 polling location per precinct. Part of the issue there was staffing, because we have 4 poll workers per precinct, but when you have that many locations, in reality, you need more. Part of it's been finding the workforce. We kind of made a conscious decision back then. My understanding of it anyway was that we made a conscious decision to kind of shrink that number within reason. I know the location changes that I've been involved in, the farthest the voters have had to go in those specific changes has been about 1.5 miles to 2 miles. So we try to keep it as close as possible. It's a challenge. I guess that's a good way to say it.
Just to jump off this accessibility thing.
Yeah.
Do you guys have a Board of Elections mailbox that people can drop it off? Because 55 cents postage stamp might not sound a lot, but we do have a lot of people in the county that are below the poverty line. You add up 3-4 people that are above age 18 living in a household, because many adults share houses because they can't afford, to pay bills. So you guys have that accessible? Where is that location at so that people aren't?
Yes. So where the drop box is, it is at the courthouse. I don't know if you've seen the new plaza. The new plaza is very accessible, friendly.
Yeah.
It's very, very friendly to get in and out. The requirements that we have for the drop box are that it's under 24-hour surveillance and it's securely fastened wherever it is. We tried to get it bolted to the ground with brand new concrete out there. The county wasn't a huge fan of that idea. So where we have it right now is kind of on the southeast-ish side of the courthouse, and it's chained to a light pole there.
Yep,
And it's about the only location that's there that fits all those requirements. If it were me, my thought is it might be better kind of out towards the sidewalk. If we keep it away from the parking spaces at least, so that you can walk up or drive and then it's right there. Unfortunately, unless we bolt it to the concrete, that leaves us putting it in the right of way for people that want to cross the street or right in the middle of the sidewalk.
I had to use it, and you have signage that leads you right
Yes.
to it, so it wasn't like.
And all the
hard
fencing's
to
down.
find.
We are actually, if you've seen the box, we are going to get it wrapped. It's going to be red, white, and blue, and very
Nice.
colorful and much more noticeable. I've been having a lot of people say that they didn't see the big gray box.
Really? It's a big gray box.
Yeah.
I'll tell you.
So this is just for one county, just the entire county?
Yes,
There's only one?
so currently we're operating on a directive that says that we are only allowed to have one directive or one drop box. I know it's currently in court. I think it just went back to an appellate court. Currently we're working off the directive that says we are allowed one, and expressly prohibited from buying clothes.
And I have a question, and you might not know the answer, and I apologize that I didn't get it to you in
No,
advance.
you're
I just
good.
thought of it. Is there a ward that might need more marketing or voter support? Like, I live on Cedar Street. I think I'm the second ward or the third ward. I get it confused, but we have to go to, I believe, Hobart. I think last year we went up to Club 55 or whatever it was called. Used to be at the library. So I'm just wondering again, like if there was a ward like where people could market or help build votes, do you know of an area or a ward or?
Off the top of my head, I wouldn't.
Okay.
But I'll tell you what, I can go back and check some recent election results and see what kind of the turnout's been
Okay.
in each of the wards.
It could be helpful because then we could look at maybe like, is it an access or is it a marketing or, you know, how could we support building that up for?
Well, within Troy, Tip, and Piqua, about 55% of eligible voters vote in Tip. In Piqua, it's only 35% of eligible voters vote, and then 45% in Troy. That's rounding, but that's pretty much.
I'd say, yeah, that sounds about right.
So that brings me to the question of what are you doing as a Board of Elections to increase that?
So one of the biggest things we try to do, and this has been recent, since I started, I kind of took over our social media accounts, which hadn't been touched since 2017 or so. So we try to get as much information as possible out on our Facebook and our Twitter. Been a little rough on that the last month or so, and we've got a lot really busy. Getting information out on social media. So in March, if you look at a Miami Valley Today, anywhere between mid-March and mid-April, there was an absentee application within the first 2-3 pages of that paper. Every day for just about a month. But as soon as that election kind of went the way it did, we sat down with the newspaper and said, okay, let's get this out there. Basically, anytime we sit down and we say, okay, what can we do? We try to make it happen. I know we're waiting to hear back. We did apply for a grant with the Center for Tech and Civic Life. They're giving out grants to election boards for COVID response. Part of that is voter education and awareness. If we get that, we are planning to use that on some news marketing, web marketing, email marketing. And I think we've got a quote on YouTube ad marketing, which, by the way, is really cheap. You guys should really look into it.
Are you going and requesting to schools like, hey, we want to send you voter registration forms to hand to your students
Yes.
in your history classes?
Yeah, every year, at the beginning of every school year, we'll send them information on Youth at the Booth. With that, we'll send them registration forms and say, hey, even if nobody wants to work, pass out the registration forms.
And this is public and private schools.
I don't know if we're into the private schools. I think we've started working on that this year. I have to get back with you on that. I know we haven't in the past in the private schools.
Have you seen a need for like an interpreter or any of those situations come up? Do you feel everybody is able to comprehend? We have ballots in Spanish if that is an issue or arises or.
I don't think it's come up. I know,
Okay.
I believe, again, I'll double check, that our accessible voting equipment will read the ballot in other languages, but I'll have to double check that. We haven't run into that too much. Let's see. There's definitely something we can look at.
So it reads it like out loud. It doesn't like have a separate thing that is in Spanish specifically.
We don't have any ballots that we make in Spanish, but I have to check before I can confirm whether it does that. I know it has the ability to. I don't know if we had it set up to do that yet.
Okay.
But our accessible equipment, essentially what it is, it looks a lot like the old touchscreens. It's a touchscreen tablet with headphones that will read the ballot. I don't think it would be too much of a hassle to set it up to do other languages. It's definitely something we can look at.
And you guys have access, easy access to voter registration forms or absentee ballot forms that are in different languages.
I'd have to double check. I would say most likely they're on the voteohio.gov website. I imagine that's come up somewhere in the state at least once, so there's a form. Tell you what, I apologize, but I'm gonna grab my phone. I'll get you an answer on that. There's a lot of stuff like that. If we haven't run into an issue, we
Yeah,
might not be, entirely up to speed.
I think that was the key, like, is that something, we need here, or have you ran into an issue?
Yeah, I think that plays into a lot of, being comfortable. When you're teaching students, you have to make sure that everything seems seamless and they don't feel individualized and feel like they're being called out for something. So I think that turns a lot of people off if they have to have something read to them with headphones in and feel different. So I think that turns people off. So I think just like having that access to it would be really great.
Yeah, absolutely. I did just check. There is a Spanish registration form on the Secretary of State's website. I will look into ballots in other languages. Like I said, it's not something that we've run into, I don't think. Then again, I started right before the midterm elections, so I haven't been through the full cycle yet. If it's something that we're going to run into, we'll run into it next month.
Awesome.
Almost guaranteed.
Now, does the Board of Elections kind of oversee like what candidates do or don't do pertaining to the election? Like, let's just say standing near a voting area, like
Yes.
they're within the 100 feet. What does that look like?
So kind of, sort of, when it comes to election day, that's all us. If there's a candidate who is standing at the door, handing out, vote for me pamphlets, that would be call us, absolutely. That's something we handle. We don't really tell them this, but we do kind of outrank the sheriff on election day. We can instruct the sheriff to arrest people. Most counties don't usually run into that. Usually we'll just say, hey, can you run out there and tell them they need to get out of there? And that's usually enough. Those kind of issues, yes. When it comes to, hey, there's a sign on my lawn that I didn't place, that's local law enforcement. When it comes to campaign finance issues, we can forward them on to the state, but we don't ultimately make any determinations off of that. So it's kind of hit and miss. Are there any other questions? I did see on the Intergroup Relations Advisory Committee, I don't know if these are all questions that would be for me, but I did see a couple things that were local elections process that I figured I'd just throw a couple things out there. So we talked about locations and some of the rules. Constituent demographic data, I'm going to assume that's not a question for me, but I'm just going to emphatically state that we do not track any demographic data for voters. The only information that we have is their age. That would be demographics, but we don't really do anything with that, but have that as a record. Voter registration system. We use Triad Governmental Systems. It's out of Xenia. We have a server on our site and a backup server. They have a server and a backup server on their end. How districts and voting locations are decided. We kind of talked about voting locations. Precincts is based, especially in Troy, it's based off of two things. It's going to be your wards. You try to keep your wards together. And then census blocks. We can draw the precincts as long as they fit within census blocks. So here in about a year and a half, we're going to have to look at every single precinct in the county and figure out if anything needs to change. And then you might notice, say, Ward 1 might have 3 or 4 precincts. I'm not sure how many they specifically have. We have a legal limit of 1,400 voters per precinct. So we'll look at Ward 1. If they have 6,000 people in there, we divide that by 1,400 and then find a way to split that out. I think I talked about the other stuff that was in there. So,
You did a
are
great
there any
job.
other questions?
When submitting a budget, your annually budget, I know you have
Yes.
for sort of the full term yet, but when you submit a budget, are you supplying data to show like what's working, what's not working? We need more. Is there any funding issues?
In the two budget rounds that I've been through and my director's been through here, we haven't had any issues. Typically what we do is we look at what are our current costs, what are some things that we need, what do we want to do, and then we, on top of that, we plan for 3 countywide elections. So you'll have your primary and your general. It doesn't generally happen in the odd numbered years, but it's 100% possible that 21 polling locations will be full of voters in May. So we have to plan for that. And then in August, there's the potential for a special election, so we plan for that as well. We haven't had too many issues with getting our budgets through and all that so far. This year's budget, I mean, we haven't gone in front of the commissioners yet. But last year's budget, we had maybe 2 questions total from them on our budget.
So you just submit to them like an itemized budget, and then they kind of read through it and then approve it.
Yes.
So
So generally what they want information on is if there's a change.
Okay.
So if we go, say we're planning on a 2% cost of living adjustment. If we put a 2% increase in our salaries, they want to know, okay, why is there an increase? Those are usually the questions they have. They want more detail if it's a bigger jump in any of our line items or a bigger drop in any of our line items. But typically, as long as the money's there, if we have a good explanation for what we're using the money for, we haven't had too many issues. All right, I'm going to pass these out to you. I completely forgot about these. This is just more information on poll workers. Again, pass them out, give them to people. VoteOhio.gov has a pop-up. Anytime you go on the website, the first thing you'll see is a pop-up that says sign up to be a poll worker.
Thank you for your time.
Please pass that out. And I'll pass some of these out as well. If you guys have any questions, feel free to give me a call. Shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to help you guys out and get you any answers you're looking for.
Thank you. We appreciate
Thanks a lot for
it.
coming out. Very good presentation.
Yeah, I think so too.
Hey. Committee reports.
You don't have to read the entire report, minutes, you can just
Summarize it. Yeah, I knew that.
Probably just adopt it, can we, as written?
Yes.
Yeah. We can.
I think everybody's gotten them except for the ones that were handed out today.
I haven't gotten ours in yet from Education and Outreach. I can give a brief summary on that if you need me to.
Well, let's go into the Community Relations Committee. Would anybody like to speak on it, or would you just like to approve it?
Approve it?
Like to approve it? Second, and all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. And then for the education outreach, you don't have it yet, so we.
No, I don't, but I do have the notes that we took. We really
Okay.
didn't have anything new, except that we did decide that we needed to come up with the questions for the survey that we want to put out there for when it comes to education in our schools. The people, how they feel about, what kind of education they're getting, what are the problems they're coming across. Then we knew that Stephanie had mentioned the third party that was doing the survey already. So we're looking into that third party, seeing what questions they have, and then working on adding questions of our own. And then once we figure that out, then we can move on to the next step of where to go, how are we going to put those out there.
I think we will have to re-meet
Yes,
since Stephanie isn't on our
absolutely.
commission any longer.
Yep.
I think about a third of that work was going to her.
Yes.
So. Anything else?
No,
No,
I will
you're good.
have these notes typed up and sent to Salome by tomorrow evening.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. All right, the Employment Challenges Committee.
I'll just give a brief overview. We
Okay.
narrowed everything down to basically where we thought were two, we thought it was imperative that we start moving forward with some narrow, specific issues. And so we kind of came up with two areas of discussion points. One is sort of recruitment and retention of employees, and how do we do that? And do we have inclusion and diversity in that process? And then the second aspect is making sure that there's a support mechanism in place, is transportation, childcare. Do we have the amenities? And then there was some discussion about other amenities such as, do you need parks and bike paths, and what sort of amenities attract people? And so our next area of focus will be to have the Chamber of Commerce and the Troy Development Council come to our committee meeting. And then as we narrow down our presenters, I think we've talked about having some manufacturing representatives, well, maybe not manufacturing, business representatives, I guess, come and speak as part of the presentation, and then work on sort of some narrowing then some advisory position points that we'd like to then pass on to the city.
Good job.
Thank you for the overview.
Is that a good summary?
That was a really good
Yeah, it
summary.
is
Yeah,
nice.
thank you.
Picked up on everything except for your term that you use.
Oh, yeah, but he said it, so.
What's that,
The
tripod?
tripod, yeah. Okay, no worries.
Yes, we're looking at the tripod, which is healthcare, or not healthcare, childcare,
Housing,
Housing.
housing, and transportation.
yep, it's awesome.
On point. Thank you very much. I'd like to move to approve that.
I second.
Second, and all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No? Okay. All right, so that concludes our committee reports for today. And schedule of future presenters. So has anybody gotten any new names in the Salome for our up and coming meetings?
I mean, other than what's on the list.
Yeah.
I don't, can I speak to you?
Yeah, sure.
Here, I spent a little time looking through this, and it's kind of interesting how they kind of merges together. And so, and I don't know if we want to stay this long, but here's sort of what I saw from the people that were there. You can kind of divide it into like three different categories. You have sort of the city and the school people, which would be the police chief, the safety service director, the curriculum person. Then you have sort of the economy and jobs, which were the Troy Development Council and the representatives of the company. Then you have sort of the social services, which were the Job and Family Services and Marion Matters and some of those areas. So I would think that it would make some sense to kind of then just look at those, and I sort of put a 1, a 2, and a 3 by the people that were there to sort of, and I mean, I can go through it, but it's pretty self-explanatory if you divide them into that categories as to where we go. And we talked about this in our meeting. And I don't know that Patrick has brought this to all the committee meetings, but we have an annual report that's due in January as standing commission in the city of Troy. So we, at least from our committee that I was on yesterday, we want to try to get at least, I mean, you don't have to have, it doesn't be a completed report, but you have to have some status that this is what's going on. So with 3 meetings remaining, I think sort of a city school meeting, a economy jobs meeting, and a social services meeting, in whatever order this group would prefer, I think kind of gets us in a position that then, I mean, obviously, just from talking to Ian today, I can think of a number of things from Kane's dialogue that we would like to make as recommendations to help assist people in voting and I read your comments about bilingual or secondary language ballots and stuff. So I think that's how, the best way for us to get to where we can start to make those issues is to bring the people in and ask. So that would be my suggestion, as to how we proceed. So that would get us, the December 15th meeting would be our last group, and then we can meet to draft our deals. You're the chairman. That's just
We could-
kind of what we talked about in our meeting yesterday was sort of trying to get on that sort of schedule.
So what are the three names you like that?
Well, we would prioritize, like you said, the city, state, the school, and then the social service.
Okay.
So it makes sense that the law, the school, or I'm sorry, the police, that was kind of, we talked about that yesterday too, that's kind of the initial topic, so if we could
Yeah,
look at
that's a
that.
big topic.
Here's what I put, Marvin, is I put Michael Moore and Sean McKinney, Matt Simmons, and Patrick Tiddington. I put all as a one, and that would be the city school combined meeting.
Okay.
The economy jobs meeting, I put potentially Charles Kessler. I don't, I'll defer to Sonia on that.
Yeah, he would be the job center.
Jobs, so
the
more jobs than
under-resourced.
social services.
Yes.
Okay, and then Andrea Keller, Joseph Graves, Sexton Mosier, and Heidi Jones would be the sort of, and I think all of the business people will go pretty quick. They're not going to be nearly as long as they are here. I think they're just going to be, this is what we do. I know Hobart has a really good outreach program. And then under 3, I think I put like Sarah Baker for the transportation, Dorothy Caruso from Tri-County, maybe Kessler, maybe Sonia knows some other people that might be there.
You could even put, if Dorothy, we were talking about, one aspect was mental health, but that also came in as CIT unit, which then could go with the police, or that's a county, actually.
I
I
just
need
think
to
we
do a
got
little
to,
bit more research.
because, I mean, we're already at 8 o'clock today,
Yeah,
and
I
I think we
think
do have to kind of narrow.
I vote for our first initiative to be the law in doing the first set of people as one. It makes sense. And then moving to social service, and I mean, it's gonna take us time to develop the survey for school. I think school's gonna be
Right.
more of a
I
long
think that's gonna
term,
be
so
the
maybe
long-
that would be the last. And we hit those two with voting, it's time for that. I mean, I think it makes sense, because we do need to get honed down to recommendations and get writing on that.
But I would like the economy and jobs people, just because I think that Hobart program is going to be some people that we. can
Oh,
do.
with heart, so make that two. Yeah.
Yeah,
that makes
I
sense.
would do city schools, economy, and then social services.
Yeah, it's kind of already in that row, ironically. It's all laid out already. So, yeah, I agree. I would,
The other thing before we convene, because I know it is getting late, and I don't know if you want to take steps on this now, but there is a new draft of an operating guideline.
I think we need to do
And
that.
I think we need to decide whether that's something that we want to adopt.
I agree.
We can do that today, can't we, Patrick? We've had sufficient time. Can we change the operating guidelines by vote today?
Yeah.
It came out in the minutes, right?
Did you, we
You
all
wanna
looked
take
at
time?
this.
You want to take time? I said, would you like to take more time? That's what I'm saying.
Everyone got it, right? So you
Yes.
have time to look at it.
It's right here.
Then I would move that we adopt the new operating guidelines.
Okay, I'll do that.
I second.
Second. And all in favor?
Alright. Do we need to have conversation in regards to HRC members, attendance, any of that before we?
We just adopted the guidelines, so I think next
That's
time
enough for
would
now?
be the time to
It's already.
Okay.
talk about it.
October 1st, 15th, 6 PM, next meeting.
So we're going to monthlies.
I didn't
Oh, I was just.
think we were going to monthlies. Are we going to monthlies?
I was just reading
We talked
it.
about that at our meeting.
Oh, you guys talked about that last night?
Yeah.
Okay. Are you wanting to switch to monthlies? Is that what you wanted to do? I
Yeah, I
thought that
think-
we would move the subcommittee meetings. I thought we would stretch those out a little bit so we could get the work done and then we could come together. I mean, if it's my thought process is that we can continue to have these every 2 weeks until we shrink our workload down and get a little more directed, just so we're,
I think that makes some sense, at least up to December, and then let's
Right.
get our report out, get our recommendations, and then we can, I mean, it is a marathon, not a sprint. but
Yes.
I also think there's a lot of concerns that we need to get addressed.
yes.
Is that okay, Ken?
No, I agree with you, yeah, wholeheartedly, yep.
So October 1st is our next one.
Let me check
All right,
the schedule.
October 6:30. What'd you say?
Say October 1st, and that's correct, that'll be October 1st. Yes.
Does anybody want to have the meeting a little bit earlier? Like 6, like our normal ones, or?
I can do 6, I can't do anything before 6, because I see
6 is
people at
fine.
5:30.
We can, I can.
Nothing earlier than 6.
Yeah,
That's up to you.
I'm
But I can
fine
do
with
6.
yes.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So 6 p.m.
Yes.
October 1st at 6 p.m.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
And we're looking at having the city present at that one, is that?
Yes, those presenters that we just mentioned.
All 4?
October
Yeah,
1st
it'll be
at
October
6.
We're gonna do 2 weeks through December to get our reports in.
Oh, the Miami County Courthouse, how's that looking October 1st? We may have a.
What's going on?
The courthouse opens?
The opening of it.
The little food truck thing.
Oh, I didn't know.
So what's the concern with the
I
opening?
guess they're saying
Like,
like,
is that gonna overlap our meeting, or are we
Yeah,
gonna have
for
people
Yeah,
not
from
able to
5
be
to
there?
9.
I
Okay,
think that's, I mean, it's pretty open, they can go at 5 if they.
yeah, I'm fine with
Do
still
you have to
having
be
it.
there? Like, is it a work conflict
I
or?
was prepared to.
Yeah.
Well, then let's go on the 8th.
Let's go to 8, that's fine.
Do you
We
want
could move the meeting to the 2nd, if that would help. Would that help?
Is the 2nd a Friday?
Yes.
Not gonna be here.
Yeah.
No, the 2nd is a third Friday.
That's Friday, yeah.
It's Friday.
Should we do
We
that
could push it back to
Wednesday?
the Wednesday, the 30th then.
Oh, I already, community meeting is at
No.
6.
So the 1st it is. We'll try and keep it short, Salome, so you can attend your meeting.
Can we meet earlier? 5 to 6?
No, Todd was saying.
Oh,
he
that's
can't.
right.
I know
Okay.
what to be on my first.
If you want, if I get a lot of notice, if you'd rather, what day is it, October 1st?
I think 6 is okay. Because
I
I,
can't.
it bumps up against my work day, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah,
What are we doing?
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock on the 1st?
Yes.
October 1st is 6.
Oh,
City, you and McKinney. Anybody else you want? Simmons?
I know that I can talk for now.
Yeah, but you have to say something, Patrick.
we'll send somebody to bring food from the food truck then.
Yeah, bring us some food.
So.
Solid, what day is your
Now,
birthday?
I
The
don't know.
8th.
The scope of the topics.
Yeah, I think that might be a little too much. I think it was maybe 2. So
McKinney.
maybe
I would
Sean
say
and
Sean and
Matt. Yeah, see Sean and Matt.
Questions beforehand like we did last time?
Yes.
At least better to know what
Yeah.
your interest is.
And if they like to give us what they're gonna present, so we can be prepared too, that would be great.
Are we doing it here?
Yes.
So we can give them questions and they can give us
Chief,
information.
fire chief, and Mr. Director.
No,
No, just the.
no,
McKinney and
just
Sons.
Sean, McKinney and Matt Simon.
Okay. I want to
And
ask
if, and
once again.
so if you're gonna communicate with them, hard questions, can you ask them to give us their presentation? If they have one.
It depends on what you want to hear and what information are you looking for. If there is up to
Well,
them
the
to
question
talk
is,
to you.
so Ian came tonight and he gave us, like, he went through a presentation.
Okay,
Ian,
because I told him we were kind of looking for, we had it on one of your initiatives. And
Right,
also
right.
he came up with.
He's just saying he wants a copy of a presentation. If they have like a presentation that they're going through to tell us that, we want a copy so we can follow along.
We have initiatives
But
relative
they
to.
will build the presentation.
Great.
based on.
Right.
Based
So
on
we
the
give them the
initiative.
initiatives and then they can see
Yeah.
it to build it.
But if you want to,
I
them
guess
to
what-
build the presentation, then.
I guess what I was saying is that if they have a presentation that they would like to present,
How are you?
if we could have it in advance.
The coffee.
I'm sorry I
14
didn't
minutes.
clarify
I was just
that.
gonna say.
Oh, is it?
I can send you guys my notes. I didn't have like a presentation.
Okay.
I have some notes. I can send that. So you guys have that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, you got any public comments?
Yes.
Before you get into public comments, Mr. Chair, just one housekeeping item, going back to Grant's presentation regarding the public records retention schedule. If you could, if that's acceptable to you, if you could do a motion in a second so that we comply.
Okay.
I move we adopt the record retention schedule as presented in our packet.
No second.
Can I take 1 minute? I think I
Yeah,
have a
no,
question about
I looked
something
at it
that I
earlier.
wasn't going to bring up tonight, but I would like to bring it up. When we get to it.
No, the retention schedule. Yeah, it should have been after. It just looks like.
We talked about like how long and the sources.
It seems pretty typical of any agency that
I think it's kind of a form
Yeah,
that we
it's just-
got. You want to look at, did you get,
Yeah, I have to.
did someone need one?
I'm shocked that I didn't.
It's, I think it's identical to other agencies,
Okay.
departments in the city. We can destroy and keep up to date the records unless we have the
Thank you.
schedule authorized.
Oh, I'm cool.
it's pretty standard.
Yeah. I learned so much tonight.
Okay, all right, we can go ahead and see if it's fine.
You okay with it?
I guess my question is, and I didn't want to bring this up here, I was gonna shoot an email, but when we're looking at email communications, those, he's not here, so let's approve this at our next meeting.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just send an email first.
I'll withdraw the motion and we can talk about it.
Thanks. All right, thank you.
All right, so now we're gonna move on to
Yes.
public comments.
Are there any public comments?
Question.
You're more than welcome to come up and have your comments or questions or anything.
I move.
No public comments? Yes.
My second.
Can I say something?
Sure.
Before? When I envisioned the Troy Human Relations Commission and what the word diversity means, was not to build walls, but to tear walls down and build bridges. We can't forget that the civil rights movement was not just the Black community, but it was also the disabled community. It was women. It was Hispanics. It was Asian Americans. We can't build walls. We can't shut each other out. We can't leave each other in the dark, because that movement only worked when we came together. because the people is where the power is. And when you add each minority up, we are the majority. And that is all I
For
have
that.
to say.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you for those
Appreciate
words.
that.
I can move to adjourn the meeting.
A second?
All in favor? Have a wonderful evening.
Can I end with this? Oh, man.